The sun rose like a tyrant, spilling its merciless heat over the barren earth. Dust clung to everything: the stones, the air, the skin of the slaves who bent under its weight. Chains rattled in rhythm with footsteps, a grim chorus that announced the beginning of another day of torment. Among those shackled figures was Amir, his back already bent, his wrists scarred from iron cuffs that never came off. He had been here for so long that time itself had become a blur. Days and nights merged into one endless wound. Still, Amir remembered fragments of a world before chains. His mother's voice, soft and trembling, singing to him in the language of home. The deep baritone of his father, who once told him that dignity was a man's last shield. These memories haunted him like faint stars swallowed by the vast black sky. Now there was no shield, no dignity, only the overseer's whips and the master's laughter. The work was relentless. At dawn, the slaves were dragged from the crude shelters that barely shielded them from the cold night winds. They were forced into the fields, or worse, into the stone pits, where the earth itself seemed to resist their touch. Amir's task that morning was to carry boulders up a steep incline, his bare feet slipping on jagged ground. Each stone felt heavier than the last. Yet the overseer, Jawan, barked orders with venom. Striking out with his whip whenever someone faltered, the leather kissed Amir's back more than once, opening old scars, reminding him of his place. He did not cry out. He never did. The overseers hated his silence more than his screams. They wanted submission, not resilience. Sweat poured into Amir's eyes, stinging like salt in a wound. He lowered one stone after another, his muscles trembling under the weight. Other slaves collapsed beside him, thin men with hollow cheeks, women whose hands bled raw from endless labor. Yet the overseers only jeered, calling them beasts, less than human, fit only for the dust they worked in. At midday, the heat became unbearable. The slaves were given a handful of water so little it mocked their thirst. Amir pressed the few drops against his cracked lips and secretly tilted the rest toward the mouth of a boy beside him, no more than 14. The boy's eyes widened with gratitude before fear crossed his face. Small kindnesses were punished, but Amir didn't care. In a world designed to strip them of humanity, such gestures were acts of defiance. Jawan noticed. He always noticed. "You think you're better than the rest?" He spat, striking Amir across the face with the back of his hand. "You think kindness will save you? Dogs don't need kindness. Dogs need to be broken." Amir tasted blood on his tongue. He kept his gaze lowered, not because he feared Jawan, but because he knew looking up would invite worse. Yet inside, rage burned like a hidden coal. As dusk fell, the slaves were herded back into their quarters. The shelter was little more than a shack with rotting wood and dirt floors. Rats scurried between sleeping bodies. Amir lowered himself onto the ground, his body aching from the day's torment. Around him, whispers drifted like smoke, prayers in different tongues. Sighs of despair, and the quiet sobs of women who mourned lives stolen long ago. Amir closed his eyes. He tried to remember his mother's face, but the image blurred. He clung to the memory anyway, as though by keeping her alive in his mind, he could keep a part of himself alive too. The stars outside blinked through the cracks of the roof. Once they had meant freedom. His father had told him that the stars guided men home. Now, they felt like witnesses to his suffering, silent and distant. Still, Amir whispered to himself, too soft for anyone to hear, "I am not broken. Not yet." The words were not hope, they were survival. He knew tomorrow would bring more whips, more dust, more humiliation. But tonight, in the stillness of his own heart, Amir clung to the smallest ember of strength, an ember the overseers could not see, and therefore could not extinguish. And so, the night swallowed him scarred, beaten but not defeated. Asterisk, the dawn whistle cut through the silence like a blade. It wasn't music, it was a sentence. The slaves stirred in the dark, their limbs stiff, their backs raw from the day before. Chains scraped the earth as they rose, a sound so constant it had become the rhythm of their existence. Amir pushed himself up from the dirt floor, his body aching with every movement. His shoulders throbbed from yesterday's labor. But he knew today would bring worse. Waiting outside was Jawan, the overseer. His whip dangled from his hand like a serpent, ready to strike. Jawan was not just cruel, he was cruel with purpose. He believed breaking men was an art, and Amir was his favorite canvas. "You," Jawan barked, pointing at Amir before the line of slaves. "Front. Today you'll teach the others what obedience means." Amir stepped forward, his eyes low, his chains dragging. He did not speak. Speaking invited pain, but silence invited suspicion to dot the work that day was in. The stone pit a hollow in the earth where the sun pooled like molten fire. The slaves were forced to haul enormous slabs of rock from one end to the other, work designed not to build but to destroy bodies. Jawan stalked the pit, his shadow falling across Amir again and again. Amir bent his knees, lifted the stone and staggered forward. His arms shook. Sweat poured down his face, blinding him. A misstep sent him crashing to the ground, the stone slamming into his chest. He gasped, trying to drag air into crushed lungs. The whip sang once, twice, 3 times. The leather tore into his back, reopening wounds, sending pain lancing through his body like fire. The other slaves watched in silence, their faces blank, their eyes deadened by years of witnessing the same cruelty. None dared to help. "On your feet, dog," Jawan snarled. "You'll crawl until you learn to walk." Amir pushed himself up, stone by stone, muscle by muscle, until he stood again. He lifted the slab once more, staggering forward under its crushing weight. He would not give Jawan the pleasure of seeing him broken on the ground, but Jawan was relentless. Every stumble brought more lashes, every falter more humiliation. At one point, Jawan forced Amir to carry 2 stones at once while the others watched, their own burdens temporarily eased. It was not mercy, it was spectacle. By midday, Amir's back was slick with blood and sweat. His vision blurred. Yet, when he saw a younger slave collapse nearby, boy no older than 15, Amir stepped sideways, shifting some of the weight from the boy's trembling shoulders. It was a quiet act of defiance, one Jawan noticed immediately. "You think you're a savior?" Jawan hissed, striking him again, this time across the face. "You think your strength belongs to you? It belongs to me." The whip fell harder, each strike designed to tear flesh, to remind Amir that even his smallest acts of kindness would be punished. Still, Amir kept his mouth shut. His silence was his weapon. His refusal to give Jawan the music of his screams. When the sun finally dipped, the slaves were herded back to the quarters. Amir collapsed onto the dirt, his body trembling. Rashid, the young boy, crawled toward him in the darkness. "Why do you do it?" Rashid whispered. "Why take the lash from me? Why not just let me suffer?" Amir turned his head, his lips cracked and bleeding. His voice was hoarse but steady. "Because if we let them turn us into beasts," Amir said, "then we are already dead." The boy stared at him in silence, the words sinking deep. In a place where hope was rarer than water, Amir's defiance was a seed. Jawan, lurking outside, smiled in the shadows. He had seen it too, the way the boy looked at Amir, the way the others whispered his name in the dark. A spark was growing among the slaves, and Jawan was determined to crush it. That night, Amir lay awake, every nerve in his back screaming. But within his chest, beneath the pain, something pulsed, steady and unyielding. His master could scar his body. His overseer could strip him of food, dignity, and rest. But there was one thing Amir swore: they would never take his will. And so, as the stars blinked coldly above, Amir whispered again to himself, "I am not broken. Not yet. I am not broken. Not yet." The pit smelled of sweat, dust, and blood. The air was heavy, thick with the groans of the weary and the crack of whips. Amir staggered under another stone, his breath coming in ragged bursts. When he noticed Rashid, the boy he had shielded days before, struggling beside him, Rashid's frame was thin, his arms too small to bear the weight of the work. His knees buckled, and the stone rolled from his hands, clattering against the ground. Before the whip could fall, Amir shifted his own burden to cover for the boy. Jawan's eyes narrowed from across the pit, but this time he did not strike. Instead, he watched. Amir knew what that meant. Punishment would come later, in a way more cruel than the lash dot that night. When the slaves were herded back to their quarters, Rashid crawled beside Amir, his eyes wide with fear and gratitude. "You'll get yourself killed for me," Rashid whispered. Amir lay back against the dirt wall, his chest heaving, his body one throbbing bruise. "If I die," he said quietly, "then at least I'll die knowing I wasn't the man they want me to be." The words hung in the air. Silence stretched until another voice, soft and steady, cut through the dark. Samira, a woman who had been enslaved longer than most could remember, spoke from her corner. Her face was hidden in shadow, but her voice carried strength. "Your words are dangerous, Amir," she murmured, "but they are also the only thing keeping us human." Amir turned toward her. In the dim light of a dying fire, he could just make out her eyes, hard, unbroken, despite years of torment. Samira had endured everything: humiliation, assault, the endless weight of forced labor. Yet she spoke with calm authority, as if suffering had made her spine steel. That night, the three of them formed a fragile bond. They whispered when the guards were far, sharing pieces of their stolen pasts. Rashid spoke of his village, burned to the ground. He had once dreamed of being a shepherd, guiding flocks across green hills. Now he guided only stones from one place to another. Samira told them nothing of her past at first, only that she once had a name for her. She did not speak of him again, and Amir did not press. Pain shared was pain deepened. Some wounds were too raw for words. Amir himself offered fragments, the songs his mother sang, the wisdom of his father. He did not tell them how often he feared those memories would fade, swallowed by the pit and the lash. But in their eyes, Rashid's eager, Samira's steady, he saw reflections of himself. They were reminders that even among slaves, brotherhood could survive. Days turned into weeks. Whenever possible, Amir shielded Rashid from the harshest labor, teaching him how to brace his knees, how to breathe under weight, how to endure in silence. Samira shared what little food she could spare, sometimes placing her own portion into Rashid's hands when the guards weren't looking. It was a triangle of survival: Amir's strength, Samira's wisdom, Rashid's youth that gave them all something to cling to. But bonds were dangerous in a world built on chains. Jawan noticed the way they huddled together, the way Rashid's eyes sought Amir's approval, the way Samira softened when Amir spoke. One evening, as the slaves were lined up for inspection, Jawan stepped forward. His whip coiled in his hand. "Dog," he spat, pointing at Amir. "Do you think I don't see it? You think I don't see the way you make the others look at you? You're no leader. You're mine." He struck Amir across the back, then pointed the whip toward Rashid. "And if you keep this brotherhood," Jawan hissed, "then every lash meant for you will fall on him instead." Amir's chest clenched. He wanted to shout, to strike back, to tear the whip from Jawan's hand, but he stayed silent. His silence was the only shield he had left. That night, in the shadows of the slave quarters, Rashid trembled with fear. "He'll kill me because of you," the boy whispered. Amir placed a rough, scarred hand on Rashid's shoulder. "He'll try. But so long as I breathe, he'll have to go through me first." Samira, listening, leaned closer. "Jawan wants to break you, Amir. He knows that once you are broken, the rest of us will follow. Do not let him see your fear." Amir nodded, though inside his chest a storm raged. He was not afraid for himself. He was afraid of what his defiance would cost the people he cared about. Still, as he lay down in the dirt, he whispered the same words he had spoken every night since his capture. "I am not broken. Not yet." And in the silence, Rashid whispered them too. The morning began differently. No stones, no fields, no pits. Instead, the slaves were ordered to kneel in the yard outside the master's house. Their chains linked together, their heads bowed low. The sun beat down on their necks, and the dust rose in dry clouds each time the overseers paced before them. Amir kept his eyes fixed on the ground, but his body was tense. Something about today felt calculated, deliberate. Then the master appeared. He was a tall man draped in silks, his boots polished so bright they caught the sun like mirrors. His face was smooth, unscarred by labor, and his smile was thin as a knife's edge. Around him lingered Jawan, whip in hand, his eyes already searching for Amir. "Today," the master declared, "we'll learn your place not only as workers, but as animals. You serve not just with your bodies, but with your humiliation. Your dignity belongs to me," he pointed at Amir. "You clean my boots." The guard shoved Amir forward, forcing him onto his knees. His chains dragged across the dirt as he bent before the master. The boots gleamed, untouched by the dust Amir lived in. The master leaned close, whispering so only Amir could hear, "You are nothing. Even the dust beneath my feet has more worth than your black skin." Amir's jaw clenched. His chest tightened with rage, but his hands moved anyway. He wiped the leather with his bare palms, polishing them until he saw his own scarred face reflected in the shine. Each stroke stripped him of something unseen, something deeper than flesh. When the master was satisfied, Jawan took over. "It's not enough," he sneered. "Let's see how strong your loyalty truly is." He dragged Rashid forward by the hair. The boy cried out, stumbling to his knees. Samira rushed forward, but a guard held her back, twisting her arms until she gasped in pain. Jawan tossed a whip at Amir's feet. "Beat him," he ordered. Amir froze. His heart stopped in his chest. Rashid's wide eyes locked on his, filled with terror and trust all at once. The boy's lips trembled, as if to say, "Don't do it." "No," Amir whispered. His voice was steady, but his body shook. Jawan's smile widened. "Then she dies." He nodded toward Samira, whose arms were wrenched cruelly behind her back, her face pale but unyielding. The guard pressed a blade to her throat. Amir's chest heaved. He looked at Rashid, at Samira, at the watching eyes of dozens of slaves. His mind screamed, his heart tore itself apart, but his body bent. With trembling hands, he picked up the whip. The first strike was soft, barely a touch. Jawan snarled, "Harder. Show me you understand." Amir lifted the whip again. This time, it cracked across Rashid's back. The boy flinched, biting his lip to keep from crying out. Amir's hand shook so violently he nearly dropped the whip. Tears blurred his vision, but he raised his arm once more. Each lash was heavier than the last. Not for Rashid, but for Amir's soul. Every strike was a betrayal, a death of something inside him, by the time Jawan was satisfied. Rashid lay gasping on the ground, his back bleeding. Amir dropped the whip, his hands covered in the boy's blood. Samira's eyes burned into him not with blame, but with a sorrow deeper than words. The slaves were herded back to their quarters that night, but Amir did not move with them. He collapsed against the dirt wall, his body trembling, his spirit hollow. He pressed his hands to his face, the smell of blood still clinging to his skin. Rashid, weak and trembling, crawled beside him. His voice was faint but steady. "It wasn't you," he whispered. "It was them." Amir shook his head, tears streaking his dust-covered cheeks. "It was my hand. My hand." Samira knelt on his other side, her voice firm despite the bruise blooming on her neck where the blade had pressed. "You chose survival," she said. "That is not the same as surrender." But Amir did not believe her. That night, when he whispered his words to the stars, "Aim not broken." Not yet. He could not bring himself to believe them. His voice cracked. His heart felt ashdot for the first time since his capture. Amir wondered if the whip had finally done what no blade, no chain, no hunger had achieved. Perhaps he was broken after all. Perhaps he was broken after all. The days after Rashid's whipping stretched like shadows long, heavy, suffocating. Amir carried his shame with him into the pit, into the yard, into the restless silence of the slave quarters. Every time he lifted a stone or bent beneath a burden, he saw Rashid's bleeding back in his mind, the whip still heavy in his hand. The overseers had not only scarred Rashid, they had scarred Amir's soul. Yet in that wound, something strange began to grow. One night, after the guard's footsteps faded and the rats scurried in the dark, Rashid turned toward him. His voice was a whisper, raspy from exhaustion but laced with fire. "I'd rather die free than live like this." The words stunned Amir. The boy's face was pale. His lips cracked, his body still trembling from pain, and yet his eyes blazed with a light Amir had not seen before. Amir shook his head. "Don't speak like that. Death comes easily enough without you inviting it." But Rashid leaned closer, his breath hot against Amir's ear. "We can't let them keep us like this. Not forever. You think I don't see it? The others, they look to you. You don't scream when they beat you. You don't bow when they mock you. They see strength in you. And if you stand, maybe they will too." Amir stared at him, his heart pounding. Strength. The word felt foreign. All he saw in himself was failure, humiliation, blood on his hands. From the corner, Samir's voice joined them, steady and low. "He's right. They already fear you, Amir. Why do you think Jawan singles you out? Because he knows if you don't break, the rest of us might remember we are still human." Her eyes glistened in the dim firelight. "You carry their hate, but you also carry our hope." Amir wanted to protest, to deny the weight they tried to place upon him. He was no leader, no savior. He was just a man trying to survive one more day. But deep inside, her words struck a chord. He remembered his father's voice, years ago, telling him, "Chains break in the heart before they break in the world." That night, Amir could not sleep. The words of Rashid and Samira echoed in his mind. His body throbbed with pain, his back raw from labor. But his heart beat with something new, an ember he had thought long extinguished. The next day in the pit, he began to notice things he had ignored before. The way the guards rotated their shifts, the weak links in the fences, the moments of inattention when the dogs wandered, small cracks in an unbreakable wall. When he lifted stones, he whispered to Rashid how to shift weight without breaking bones. When they paused for water, he murmured to Samira where the shadows were deepest at night. It wasn't a plan, not yet alone, fragments of thought, sparks too small to be called fire. But still, they glowed. That evening, as the slaves were herded back, Amir saw something shift in their eyes. Not just Rashid and Samira, but others too, the silent men with hollow cheeks, the women with calloused hands. They had noticed. They were watching him, waiting for something he had not yet given. Jawan noticed too. He always did. His eyes followed Amir with a predator's patience. That night, Rashid whispered again, his voice trembling but fierce, "We can run. We can fight. Even if we die, at least we'll die as men, not as cattle." Amir's chest tightened. The boy's courage both terrified and inspired him. He remembered the shame of the whip in his hand, the sound of Rashid's cries. Perhaps this was the way to redeem it, not with words, but with action. He placed a hand on Rashid's shoulder, his voice low, steady. "Not yet, but soon. A fire starts small, too small for them to see. That's when it's strongest." Samira leaned in, her eyes searching his face. "And when the fire burns?" Amir looked toward the stars peeking through the cracks of the roof, the same stars his father once said led men home. His lips pressed into a thin line. "Then we'll either be free," he said, "or ashes." For the first time since his capture, Amir did not whisper his nightly words alone. As he murmured, "I am not broken." "Not yet," Rashid repeated them. Then Samira. And soon, the whispers spread across the room like wind-stirring embers. In the darkness, the overseer slept in ignorance while in the hearts of the chained. A flicker of rebellion began to glow. The rebellion was never spoken aloud. It was passed in glances, in whispers carried like fragile secrets between exhausted breaths. It was in the way Amir helped a fallen man to his feet, or how Samira shared her crust of bread, or Rashid's growing habit of standing taller despite his bruises. The overseers saw only slaves moving through endless labor. They did not yet see the spark beneath the ashes. But sparks are dangerous things, and sparks, once glimpsed, are swiftly stamped out. It began with hunger. The rations had been cut to almost nothing, the master claiming the grain was needed for his household. Slaves grew weak, collapsing more often in the pit. One night, Rashid could not take it any longer. While the guards dozed, he slipped into the storeroom where sacks of grain were stacked like treasure. His hands shook as he tore a small handful free, just enough to fill his stomach. Maybe enough to share with Amir and Samira. He never made it out. The sound of the door slamming open cracked like thunder. A torch flared, and Rashid froze in its glow, the stolen grain spilling through his fingers like sand. The next morning, the slaves were dragged into the yard. Rashid stood at the center, wrists bound, his head bowed. Jawan circled him like a vulture, the whip coiled in his hand, a cruel smile tugging at his lips. "This," Jawan announced, his voice carrying, "is what happens when dogs bite the hand that feeds them." Amir's stomach turned to stone. He stepped forward, chains clinking, but guards pressed him back with the butts of their spears. His heart thundered as Rashid raised his eyes. For the first time, there was no fear in them, only resolve. JAWA and struck. The whip lashed across Rashid's back, tearing through cloth and skin. The boy gritted his teeth, refusing to cry out. Another strike, and another. Blood sprayed, staining the dust beneath his feet. "Stop!" Amir roared, his voice shattering the silence. "He's just a boy. Punish me instead." The guards shoved him down, but his words hung heavy in the air. For a heartbeat, Jawan paused, considering. Then he laughed, a sound that chilled Amir to the bone. "You want to suffer for him? You already are." And the whip fell again, and again. Rashid's body convulsed under each strike, yet his lips pressed together, his eyes burning with defiance. His silence was a blade sharper than any steel. It denied Jawan the satisfaction of his screams. The other slaves watched, hollow-eyed, their faces masks of helplessness. They had seen such punishments before. They had learned to look away, to bury their rage under layers of survival. But this time, some could not look away. Rashid's courage stirred something dangerous in them, something Jawan saw and hated. By the 10th lash, Rashid's legs buckled. By the 20th, he collapsed entirely, his body broken, the whip carving rivers of blood down his back. Still, he did not scream. Amir's throat tore with his own cry. He struggled against the guards, chains biting into his wrists, tears mixing with dust on his face. Every strike against Rashid landed on his own soul, deeper and heavier than the lash itself. When it was finally over, Rashid lay crumpled in the dirt, his chest rising and falling in shallow, ragged breaths. Jawan wiped sweat from his brow, satisfied. "Let this be the price of defiance," he declared. "Let every slave remember it." The slaves were driven back to the quarters, but Amir refused to move until two others lifted Rashid's body and carried him inside. They laid the boy down on the dirt floor, his skin torn, his blood soaking into the ground. Amir knelt beside him, pressing cloth against the wounds. Whispering prayers he barely remembered from his childhood, Rashid's eyes fluttered open. His voice was weak, a whisper of breath. "Did you see Amir?" "I didn't scream." Amir's chest broke. He bowed his head until his forehead touched the dirt beside Rashid's hand. "You're braver than any of us," he whispered. "Braver than me?" Samira crouched on the other side, her eyes glistening, her hands steady as she cleaned the wounds. "He has shown us the truth," she said softly. "We can endure their chains. We can endure their whips. But we will not endure forever." That night, while Rashid drifted in and out of fevered sleep, Amir sat awake, staring at the stars through the cracks of the roof. His body was heavy, his soul carved open with guilt and rage, but his heart burned with a vow stronger than iron. "If I cannot save him." Amir thought, "Then I will save what he fought for," he whispered into the darkness. The words harsher than prayer, fiercer than hope. "I am not broken. Not yet. And I will not die in chains. Yet. And I will not die in chains." The night pressed down heavy and endless, the kind of silence that feels alive, listening. The slaves lay on the dirt floor of their quarters, bodies aching, spirits bruised. Yet beneath the stillness ran a current of quiet defiance. Rashid's punishment had carved fire into their hearts, a fire that no whip could extinguish. Amir sat awake, his back to the wall, his eyes fixed on the boy curled weakly beside him. Rashid's breathing was shallow, but he lived. The boy had survived what should have killed him. His endurance was more than strength. It was a message. Chains can wound the body, but not the will. Samira's hand found Amir's in the dark. "It has to be tonight," she whispered. "Before the fever takes him? Before Jawan finds another excuse to finish what he started?" Amir nodded. His chest was a knot of fear and determination. He had no weapons, no plan, but desperation. Yet desperation was enough. Freedom had to be taken, not given. The moment came when the guards grew careless, drunk on stolen liquor, their laughter spilling across the yard. The slaves stirred like shadows, their movements silent. Rehearsed in stolen moments over whispered conversations, Samira crept to the doorway, her thin frame blending with the night. She slipped a stone beneath the latch, easing it open without a sound. Amir lifted Rashid into his arms, the boy's body light as a bundle of reeds, his head resting against Amir's shoulder. They moved. The night air hit Amir like cold water, sharp and intoxicating. The stars burned above them, vast and unyielding, as if bearing witness. Each step felt like walking on glass, the world so fragile. The price of discovery, so fatal. Samira led the way, her bare feet padding across the dirt. They crept past the animal pens, the smell of dung sharp in their noses, past the piles of stone where their backs had bent in endless labor. Every corner of the compound was etched into their bones, every pathway memorized through suffering. Now those pathways became a map to freedom, but freedom does not come quietly. A sound split the air, a cough, harsh and sudden. One of the guards stirred, fumbling with his cup. His eyes narrowed toward the shadows. Samira froze, her breath caught in her throat. Amir tightened his grip on Rashid, ready to run, ready to die if need be. Then, from the far side of the yard, a noise erupted. A crash, loud and jarring. Another slave, unseen in the darkness, had tipped over a cart, the clatter echoing like thunder. The guard cursed, stumbling toward the sound. A sacrifice. A distraction. Someone had chosen chains over silence. "Now," Samira hissed. They bolted, hearts pounding, feet pounding against the earth. Amir's muscles screamed under Rashid's weight, but he did not falter. Every step forward was a rebellion. Every breath stolen from the master was a prayer of defiance. They reached the outer wall. The barrier between bondage and the uncertain world beyond. It loomed tall, rough stone catching the moonlight. Samira scaled it first, her fingers scrabbling against cracks, her legs trembling but determined. She hauled herself up, scraping her skin raw. Amir pressed Rashid upward, his arms burning. Samira leaned down, grabbing the boy's wrists, pulling him inch by inch until his small body lay across the wall's top. Amir followed, dragging himself upward, his chest heaving, sweat blinding his eyes. He reached the crest, his hands clutching the stone, his legs kicking for purchase. And then a shout. The alarm tore through the compound like a blade. Torches flared. Guards surged from the shadows, their boots pounding, their voices a storm. Samira screamed, "Jump!" Amir shoved Rashid over, the boy tumbling into the grass beyond. Samira leapt after him, her body disappearing into the night. Amir swung his leg over, but hands grabbed him, yanking him backward. He fought like a trapped animal, his fists slamming into flesh, his teeth bared. For a heartbeat, he thought he might break free. But the chains on his wrists caught on the stone, dragging him down. He fell hard, guards piling onto him, fists and boots raining down. He roared Rashid's name, Samira's name, but the night swallowed his voice. Through the blur of pain, he saw it, the faint flicker of torchlight beyond the wall, moving further into the darkness. Samira and Rashid were running into a future unchained, or perhaps into death. But they were free, if only for a moment. A smile, bloodied and broken, tugged at Amir's lips. He had given them this. He had bought their chance with his body. The last thing he heard before the world went black was Jawan's voice, dripping with fury. "Drag him to the yard. At dawn, he dies." Dawn crept slowly, cruelly, painting the horizon with strokes of pale red. To Amir, bound in the center of the yard, it looked like blood spilled across the sky. His wrists were tied to the post, his body swollen with bruises, his lips split. Each breath was a jagged stone, cutting deeper into his chest. Yet his mind was calm in a way it had never been before. He was no longer fighting for himself. His chains had never belonged to him alone. They belonged to every man and woman bent beneath the master's lash. Every child robbed of laughter, every soul silenced by fear. And now, with the noose waiting, he carried them all. The slaves were herded into the yard to witness his end. Their faces were blank masks, but their eyes burned. They had seen punishment before. They had seen death before. But this felt different. This was not a lesson. This was vengeance. Jawan strode forward, whip coiled at his side, eyes sharp with rage. This dog thought he could bite. He spat. He thought he could steal what is mine. He grabbed Amir's jaw, forcing his face upward so all could see. And this is where defiance leads. Death. Amir met his gaze and smiled, slow, broken, but steady. It was not the smile of a beaten man. It was the smile of someone who had already crossed beyond fear. Your chains can hold my body, Amir rasped. His voice cracked but strong. But not my soul. Jawan's fist slammed into his stomach, knocking the breath from him. The crowd of slaves gasped, but Amir did not cry out. He would not give them that. Not here. Not now. The executioner prepared the rope, his hands rough, his face a mask of indifference. He had done this before, too many times to count. But as he looped the noose around Amir's neck, his hands trembled ever so slightly. From somewhere in the crowd, a voice rang out. Thin, broken, but unmistakable. Don't you touch him? It was Rashid. Amir's head jerked up. At the back of the crowd, half hidden, the boy stood, supported by Samira's arm. His face was pale, his wounds raw, but his eyes blazed with fire. Somehow, impossibly, they had returned. They had come back for him. The guards surged forward, but the slaves moved first. Quietly at first, then louder. A murmur, a rumble, a storm. They pressed forward, their chains clinking like thunder, their bodies forming a wall around the boy. The overseers shouted, cracking whips. But something had shifted, something unbreakable. The slaves did not move back. For the first time, Jawan's face faltered. He saw it too, the change. He had spilled blood to kill rebellion, but blood had only watered its roots. Amir stood taller, the noose cutting into his skin. His chest swelled with pride as he looked at Rashid and Samira, at all of them. His family, his people. He spoke not to Jawan, not to the guards, but to them. His voice carried across the yard, ragged yet unshakable. Remember me, not as a slave, but as a man. They can break our bodies. They can steal our days. But they cannot chain what is already free. The words struck like fire through the crowd. Whispers became cries. Cries became shouts. The yard trembled with their voices. Freedom. Someone screamed. The executioner hesitated. His grip faltered. Jawan roared, shoving him aside, tightening the rope himself. Enough. The platform shifted beneath Amir's feet. For a heartbeat, the world went silent, and then he fell. The rope snapped taut. Pain flared white-hot. The sky shattered into fragments of light and sound. But Amir did not feel fear. He felt release. In that final breath, he saw Rashid's eyes shining with tears. Samira's hand clutching his arm, the slaves surging forward with voices raised. Darkness came, but it was not emptiness. It was freedom. When his body swung limp, silence fell heavy. But the silence did not last. The slaves roared, their cries splitting the sky, their chains clashing like weapons. For the first time, their voices were louder than the whip. Louder than the master's commands. Amir's body hung, but his soul had escaped. His death was not an end. It was a beginning. The yard would remember. The walls would remember. And the masters would learn that no chain, no whip, no rope could silence a man who had already chosen freedom in his heart. Silence a man who had already chosen freedom in his heart.